guys, and welcome back to my channel. I am back from the Philippines, where I had a lovely 8 days of sun and swimming and reading and just talking to other people at the hotel, and it was just absolutely lovely. I feel like I've been gone for like a month, which is a good sign. I think that means the vacation was very successful. I just seriously just swam and read all day. It was amazing. So today I want to talk about all the books that I was able to get to out of my TBR. So I did end up sticking with the TBR that I introduced last week, and everything was very successful. So let's start with what I finished reading. We're gonna start with probably my favorite read of the trip, and that was the nonfiction Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. This is exactly what it says on the cover. It's basically just about there was this moment in history in the 1920s where basically the Osage people were some of the richest citizens in America because their land was just full of oil, and because of the very good draft they were able to make with the government, which gave them certain rights to the land or certain rights to the oil, basically just made them very rich. And so at a certain point there was a moment in time where one by one they were being poisoned and murdered, and it became this huge case trying to solve who's doing all the murders. And then through that, it became also the birth of the FBI, because the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that whole department, it was created, but basically it was just upgraded from what it had previously been, to basically create this sort of neutral, unbiased bureau for being able to basically just provide just justice to these people, because there was a lot of scandal in the town where basically every white person in the town was trying to get money from the Osage people. So everyone was in it. They couldn't get justice just from the state because the people, and I'm going to keep this vague, but the people who were behind this plot were bribing all officials, police officers, judges, mayors, governors, etc. So this was just a fantastic, super riveting, super page-turning story. You felt incredible pain to the Osage people, particularly the one family that is at the center of this period of time, which is the Burkhart family. Molly Burkhart, and everything she had to go through is absolutely devastating. And David Grann was really good at being able to make it a very, like I said, page turning, but just also a very well flowing nonfiction story about a case that is actually quite complicated, because there were a lot of victims, there were a lot of perpetrators, there was a lot of conspiracy, there were a lot of bribes, and it just was this horrifying moment in time. So this book was really good. I really enjoyed this. I had no doubt I was going to enjoy this. This is pretty much right up my alley in terms of what I like when I read nonfiction, but this was definitely excellent. So highly recommended. The next nonfiction book I read was my sister-in-law's book. She wrote a book called But You Are Still So Young, How 30-Somethings Are Redefining Adulthood, and her name is Kayleen Schaefer. This is not my typical type of reading. I don't tend to read about sort of contemporary women and the things they go through in terms of like just growing up as a woman. Like I'll read stuff about like certain social issues, but not really so much about sort of, I mean, not to try and sound rude or to put down people, but I'm not really into like the whole affirmations type thing, into the whole like healing thy inner self. Like all those words for me, I'm sorry to say, for me they sound quite trite, and it's just not something I'm attracted to. So those kind of books don't really intrigue me, but this is not what that is, fortunately. Basically Kayleen is going through the typical milestones of what it means to be an adult. So this is for both the side of women and the side of men. So she divides the book into 5 main themes. And let me tell you what those are. So the one is completing school, leaving home, marrying, becoming financially independent, and then having a child. So these are the typical milestones that society kind of pushes you to go through, and it's sort of the milestones that typically make you turn you into an adult, basically. And she's going through those milestones, and she's using the experience of her friends to sort of go through what it means to be an adult, but more importantly, what it means when you've missed these milestones. Are you still an adult? Can you still consider yourself an adult? It deals with these ideas of sense of failure when you don't complete these milestones, or when you're late to these milestones, especially considering the fact that many people will often expect that by the time they're 30, they will have already accomplished all these things. But in today's society, that's not really so much the case. That's what it's about. I'm not going to go too much really into my personal thoughts, because my personal thoughts are obviously going to be quite biased, because I know the author. Also, the fact that her relationship with my brother is featured quite heavily in this book. And because I know the other side of the story from hers, I can't really make an objective statement on whether or not I liked the book or how I felt about it or anything like that. But she does do a good job. I do think this book is quite personal to her, and I think it's very important that it's quite personal to her. I do think in certain aspects she could have maybe pushed beyond just her friends group, to be perfectly honest. But when it comes, the whole point of this book is that each person is an individual. Each person experiences their just things differently. Everybody reaches milestones at a different pace, at a different time. Sometimes you skip a few steps, sometimes you don't do any of the steps at all, but that shouldn't define who you are. That shouldn't define whether or not you're a failure, because that's not really a thing. You can't fail just because you didn't get married. It was definitely interesting to compare sort of her experience with my experience. I'm definitely someone that has not completed the milestones. I haven't done the 2 big ones. I had the completing school, I had the leaving home, I have the becoming financially independent, but marrying and having a child at my age, really at this point, all of that's kind of over for me, to be honest. Yeah, so it's just, it's just interesting to compare, and I think it's very important. I do think it's important to sort of not try and compare yourself too much with other people, and I think she does express that quite well. So give that a read if you're interested. Then I went into my French language books, and I ended up reading the play Lucrèce Borgia by Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo being the famous author of Les Miserables. I've read not most, why am I saying most? That's a lie. I've read a lot. I've read many of his fiction books. I've read Les Miserables. I've read, I'll use the English titles. I've read not 24 Hours. The Last Days of a Condemned Man, or The Life of a Condemned Man. I've read Notre Dame de Paris. I've read The Man Who Laughs, where the man who laughs is The Man Who Laughs and then The Condemned Man. Those are my 2 favorite Victor Hugo's. But I have never actually read any of his plays. And recently, if you've been following my channel for a little while, you will notice that I've started this journey of reading the famous French plays, just out of self-interest, but also because of the fact that, yes, I am French, but because I wasn't raised in France, I never got to go through the standard French curriculum. So I kind of feel like this is a good way to catch up, kind of get a feel for what my cousins read when they were in school, although my cousins aren't very literary, so they didn't really appreciate anything they read. But still, it's a good way for me to sort of get a feel for what they had to read growing up. So while I was in American school and we read Shakespeare and Robert Frost, I believe is his name, and things like that. They read, Victor Hugo, they read Cyrano de Bergerac, they read all of those, and so it's nice for me to get a feel for all of that. I'm just noticing my tan. Sorry, I was hoping it wouldn't show up too much, but no, it does show. I was getting too much sun, and so I wore a t-shirt to go swimming, and then this happened. But it's a good thing I wore a t-shirt, or else my whole body would have looked like this, so we'll just ignore that. Sorry, I got distracted. Going back to Lucrèce Borgia, basically this book, I had fun with this. I was actually surprised this is Victor Hugo. If I had read this without any sort of like author name, I don't know if I could have said, oh yeah, that's obvious Victor Hugo, like that's totally typically him. Just because when you read his fiction, he does tend to love detail when it comes to just about anything. So I mean, I think the best comparison for this would be his work of the Condemned Man, just because that's a shorter work, and that was very much sort of a satire, a comedy, and I think that's the closest to sort of this play work. But if Victor Hugo's name wasn't on this play, I don't think I ever would have guessed that it was his work. But I really enjoyed it. So the plot of the story is basically there's this young man in Venice who is with his fellow soldier friends, and there's this woman who is sort of becoming enamored with him, or seems to have become enamored with him. And the story is basically how he is intertwined, or basically connected to this woman, and in just the progression of the story. It was fun. So there's like, it's a story of like adultery and sort of lost loves and like incest, and then like who's your real family and things like that. And it's from the very first scene, you know what the plot is, you know who's who right away. But I mean, that's kind of what a play is, right? It's not so much about shocks and twists, it's more just the development of a story. So it is very obvious what the story is, but I really enjoyed this. It's not told in rhyme or anything like that. It is very much just standard dialogue as you would speak quite normally. So it is very easy to read. This is the easiest play I've read so far, to be honest. It's basically just a Victor Hugo book without all the detail and descriptions of buildings and whatnot. So yeah, that was Lucrèce Borgia. I really enjoyed myself. This was a quite easy read, and it was a perfect beach read, basically. Another perfect beach read was La Bête, Aveugle by Edogawa Ranpo. So Edogawa Ranpo is this very famous mystery writer from Japan. So this particular book was written in 1931, and he was kind of the, oh my gosh, I can just feel the humidity still on this book. I might have to do like a touch of air conditioning to dry this out. But basically he was kind of the father of like traditional Japanese mysteries. This particular book, I'm gonna say right away, and this is gonna give you a hint as to what the book is about. If you're a fan of Perfume by Patrick Suskind, you will like this book. So this book is about a blind man who goes on a murderous rampage, and basically like where Perfume uses the idea of the murderer's nose, using the scent of a woman as his motivation for murder, the blind man uses his sense of touch of a woman for his motivation of murder, basically. So they're very similar stories. Even though Edogawa Ranpo is famous for his detective stories, however, this story is not a detective story. I did find out, I misspoke when I did my TBR video. It's not a detective story, it's just a story about the murder. But I really enjoyed this. This was a really fun page-turning read. I do think it's quite chilling, and I think definitely in 1931, this would have been a quite frightening book. I was really impressed with this. I think it's very much still readable to this day. I think this was really fantastic. And I should say, La Bête aveugle means the blind beast. So if the title is different in English, or if it's basically if this book has been translated into English, and if the title is different in English, I'll put it in the description box. I did forget to give translated titles in my description box in my TBR video. I'll go back and fix that, but they'll definitely be in this video. The last book that I was able to complete, I have to say, was actually my only real disappointment this trip, and that was Machado de Assis, L'Alienist. This makes me really, really sad because his book, The Posthumous Memoirs of Bras Cubas, for me was genius. That book was superb. It was full of satire and wit and humor and self-deprecation that was just so cleverly done. And I wanted that in this book and I didn't get it. And I have to admit that even though this book is just short of 100 pages, at 97 pages, I struggled to read this. It took me 3 days to read this. It took me like hours to read the last 10 pages. I just really, really struggled. I think I was even close to DNFing the book. If this book had been 200 pages, I would have quit at 100, to be honest. It's a book about, Simon Bagamart, or that's not how you pronounce his name because he's supposed to be Brazilian, but Simon Bagamart is a scientist who is looking into the field of psychiatry and psychology and just the concept of the mind and the idea of insanity. And he gets permission from the government to create this mental asylum, and little by little he starts to get patients. Now it starts off with just what we would consider normal psychiatry patients to come in, so people with actual mental illnesses that are quite obvious would be there. But little by little he starts bringing more people into the mental asylum that people tend to consider, that regular society would consider normal, basically. But Simon, for some reason, sees something that is not typical, that what he considers shouldn't be typical to the human mind. And little by little, eventually, basically almost the entire town gets locked up into this mental institution. And then the story follows from that, where the people revolt and they try to get the government involved. And it's this huge book about just scientific ideology and then political ideology and how those sort of go against each other, but also how they sort of they can also beget each other. So in terms of the plot, I mean, that part was absolutely fascinating, and that's why I did stick to the end. But in terms of, and the writing was nice, but for some reason I just could not get into this book. I actually think maybe, so I did say I would probably have DNF'd this book if it had been 200 pages, but maybe actually it's different. Maybe if it had been 200 pages long, maybe it would have been fleshed out a little bit more. And if it had been fleshed out a little bit more, perhaps that would have made it a slightly easier read. But I just admittedly, I struggle with this. Now, it could be a question of my environment. Maybe the beach isn't the best place to read something that's a little bit more intellectual. I don't know what the excuse is. It might be a book I need to revisit again sometime in the future. But I really struggled with this, unfortunately. So those are the 5 books that I was able to complete. And then I am currently almost a little bit more than halfway. I'm on page 316 out of 520. So I have about 200 pages left in Jules Verne, Deux vacances. Again, this is 2 years of vacation, but the English title, I believe, is different. I'll check and then put it in the description box. But I chose this book because it is about a group of young boys. There's about like 15 of them, I would say. And they were on a boat that became shipwrecked, and this is about them surviving on the island. This book used to kind of surprised me in terms of its density and in terms of its lack of page turniness, if I can make that into a word. This book is quite dense. So I feel like Jules Verne, his books can either be incredibly like super page turning, adventurous, just follow the plot, follow the story, and then you get his more descriptive works that kind of make you slow down and have to read a little bit more carefully. And this is definitely on that side. So at 500 pages, it is a lot about the descriptions of them and the work they go through and the thought process they go through when they're considering how they're going to survive on this island and how they're going to explore the island and create provisions and hunt. And it talks about the relationships between the young boys, and it's a really, really good read, but it wasn't as quick of a read as I was hoping it would be. So that's why I wasn't able to complete it, but I am still having a lot of fun with this. Now, in terms of the books I didn't read, the last 2 books on my TBR that I didn't get to were Love au Noir by Marguerite Yourcenar. So I still don't know what this one is about. And then the other book I didn't start was 消滅世界 by Sayaka Murata. This was, I mean, pretty much going in, I pretty much hadn't the idea that I wouldn't actually get to this book, but I did want to bring it along. But at the beginning of the first half of my trip, there were actually quite a bit of blackouts, electricity blackouts. There was one day actually the entire island all day was under a blackout. That one was due to construction. There was some construction that had to do on the island, and then they just turned off the electricity for the entire island. So that day was a full blackout. And this was a book, basically, my intention was to read it in the evenings. And so without electricity, I didn't have any light, so I couldn't really read this book. And this is, because it's Japanese, I tend to want to be able to like take my time, be able to look up the words that I need to look up, etc. So I didn't get to this. But I still want to read it this year. So you're not going to get a review from me anytime soon. I apologize for I know one person was like, oh, I'm so excited for your review of that book. I'm sorry, it's not coming. It's not going to come anytime soon. So please wait a little bit longer. But yeah, that's it. I guess if you want to stay a little bit longer, I can talk to you about my time, now that I've discussed all the books. But yeah, it was a really, really lovely time. It was, like I said, so basically 8 full days. And I was very surprised because the last time I went there was in 2016. And it was an island where basically like, so I was in the northeast of the island. I was very far away. So I should mention I was in Siargao, Philippines. But I was in the north side of the island. The southeast part of the island is most famous because that is where Cloud9 is, which is one of the most famous. It's like in the top 3 or 5 surfing competition areas if you're into professional surfing, because that's where they get the major waves. So usually in September, October, because that's typhoon season and that's where the big swells come in. But yeah, so that's like typically the most tourist part. But little by little, the rest of the island has been building up. And 2016 and this time, I actually chose the same hotel in an area called Pacifico in the northeast. And for there, it's a lot quieter and a lot more. It's just, I think it's better for if you want more like a calm atmosphere. So in 2016, like the road past Pacifico wasn't even finished yet. When I was there the first time, it was all gravel. And when I went there, like I would go by scooter and just sort of stop by and explore different areas and different beaches, and nothing was really labeled in so much. Turns out though, I had actually hit all the famous spots, and now they're all labeled, and now they have entrance fees and parking fees, and it's really crazy. The island has really developed significantly. There are so many hotels, there are so many more options to stay there. There are so many more tourists. I was shocked. Like seriously, in 2016 when I went, I was maybe 1 of 5 people on the plane to the island. And this time the plane was full, both the plane that comes in from Manila and the plane that comes in from Cebu. Both planes were absolutely packed. So I was really, really surprised. The island has definitely developed quite a bit. Not as alone as it used to be. There was one village I had visited in 2016 that I couldn't even find it anymore because I couldn't recognize it. It was just like, I tried to find it, and I remember it was right past the bridge in a small pocket, and it was a very poor village. But everything's so developed, I couldn't even find it anymore. It's definitely changed a lot. But I think it's good. I think it gives tourists a lot more options. It gives a lot of both just to visit, but also to put money into the local economy. And I think, you know, it's all very, very good and very fun. So I definitely recommend Siargao. It's a beautiful place. The water is so warm. It's warm year round. The beaches are beautiful. It's just really peaceful. It's fun. And yeah, it was really great time. And it was really interesting to see how it's developed in the last 2016, so then the last 8 years basically. So yeah, I did get a little tanned, as I mentioned before. Not so much. I wore a lot of sunscreen, but whenever I was on a scooter, I wore long sleeves to protect myself, because in Japan we don't get so much sun that we can like bathe outside. Like it's most sunny in Japan in the winter, and you're wearing jacket and coats and stuff like that, so it's kind of wasted. So yeah, I wasn't going, so I'm like as pale as I am post winter, so I'm not gonna 9 days in the sun, I can't not protect myself. So I wore a lot of sunscreen, and I wore t-shirts to protect my skin. But yeah, oh wow. Oh wow. Otherwise, yeah, still good. It does feel good to have my hair like not be sunny and like super curly and messed up and crazy. It feels good to go back to a little slightly polished, slightly refined. And yeah, I'm excited. And yeah, it's gonna be a good reading month. I'm for I think the end of June, I'm gonna try and finish the Jules Verne. I'm gonna finish the Chinese memoir. I will finish the Chinese science fiction, and I'm gonna go back to reading Dragon Ball, because I want to go back to reading Dragon Ball. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in my next video. Bye.